George?
Yeah, we've got two questions about the difficulties of parental consent, in effect. One from Ono. How will regulators deal with the territorial scope of the GDPR? So in particular, given GDPR is valid for all people who are physically present in the EU, whatever their nationality, it seems very difficult to implement parental consent. He mentions tourist families from China or people from Afghanistan, etc. He suggests a solution might be to create the option other country for non-EU end users, but then this would bring back the problem of self-declaration. So that one is about the territorial scope of the GDPR. Shall I ask the other one now and then people can talk about either? The second is from Tony Allen. Are the specific provisions of Article 8 of the GDPR that consent is given or authorized by the holder of parental responsibility over the child actually compatible with what can be done in the real world?
So, Anna, did you, and Jennifer, I think these are both rather than audio-visual. These are privacy questions. And so there you are, a tourist from China or Japan or Australia logging on whilst they're on holiday in Greece or Ireland. How do we deal with that? And you got the second one as well, yeah? Have you anything, Anna, do you want to comment?
Yeah, sure, John. I'll maybe just take both of them, and Jenny might come in then if she has any kind of further comments. I mean, I suppose this very vexed question of territorial scope in Article 3 of the GDPR, it's a difficult one, and the EDPB has produced papers kind of setting out kind of where the limits lie in terms of the remit of GDPR and European regulators. But I think really the nub of this issue and the obligation that we're talking about, where there's reliance on Article 8 and parental consent, lies with the with the controller themselves, because under the principle of accountability, it's up to every controller to be able to demonstrate why they have a legal basis for processing personal data. So, if their service is one that could be accessed by, the tourist from China or Afghanistan while traveling through Europe, well then, that is something that the controller, and within the particularities of their own service, is going to have to factor in terms of their kind of infrastructural and design build. So if they're seeking to rely on consent as the legal basis for the processing of data of whether it's under 16s or under 13s or whatever the age may be, depending on the country, well, then they need to be able to demonstrate that to the regulator when the regulator comes knocking on their door, because ultimately we have Article 5.2 and the principle of accountability, which means that you must be able to show that you have a legitimate legal basis for processing the personal data that you do process. So obviously, there are lots of complexities tied up in relying on parental consent in the types of scenarios that are outlined, and it is ultimately for the controller to be able to demonstrate how they collected that parental consent and how they satisfied that threshold of having made reasonable efforts, having regard to the technical means available, and I suppose in all of the circumstances in which their service might be offered to people that say on their phones may have an IP address that is very clearly one which pertains to a country outside the European Union. So I suppose the second question then on Article 8, and I think the kind of central element of that question was about whether Article 8 and the consent given was, I think the question was whether it was doable or realistic in the real world that parental consent could be verified. Maybe George could just...
I think it was to do with the fact that it may be very, very difficult to do in the real world, which it certainly is in a number of countries. Is it a vain hope to think that we could get something acceptable in the virtual world?
Oh, yeah. So I think, again, this boils down to, I suppose, the essence of this project that the EU consent team is working on. Obviously, the policymakers at an EU level felt that this was a doable, achievable objective, that parental consent could be verified, to a reasonable extent. And I think, here again, it boils back to my previous comments about controllers, if they are relying on parental consent, that they need to be able to show that they have adequate mechanisms and technological means in place. And I suppose from a regulator's perspective, and we have said this in our fundamentals, in our guidance that's published in draft form currently, the question of parental consent is one of proportionality, that being a kind of a really critical element, obviously, of EU law that covers the interpretation of the GDPR. And I suppose the whole kind of risk-based approach that must be taken to the processing of children's data and the safeguards that have to be put in place. So really, if a platform is offering a kind of a multi-user experience where there are children accessing parts of the platform, and equally there are adults that access part of the platform, well then, again, if there are adult elements of that platform that children shouldn't be accessing, we say very much that the platform must ensure that there are safeguards and settings and features in place to steer children away from those elements of the platform so that they cannot access those. And again, if parental consent is being relied on to allow children to access that platform, and it does have elements that are, I suppose, riskier for children in terms of the adult elements of the platform, well then, again, the organisation is going to have to be able to demonstrate that they have taken very much a proportionate approach to verifying that parental consent has been properly given. So that will probably in most cases involve a higher threshold in terms of being able to demonstrate that parental consent has actually been given by the parent. So again, I think all of this boils down to accountability and controllers and organizations taking ownership of the way that they design their own platforms and being able to demonstrate how they are relying on the different legal basis that they do rely on.
Thanks very much indeed. I think just not all bits of this project are going to be as easy as other bits. Some bits are going to be harder. The point is to make progress as fast as we can with all of them, even if they can't all be delivered in practical terms at the same time. We are the first people in the world effectively to be looking at this problem at this scale in this way. So I think particularly the parental consent bit is going to be the harder nut to crack. But anyway, it's still a nut that has to be cracked. Or we've got to make best efforts. So we're going to move on. Thanks very much indeed, regulators. I hope you're going to stay on, but thank you very much indeed for your contributions so far.